Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. If you're tuning in, you probably love breaking down complex information into really clear, structured insights just as much as I do. And man, today we have a truly fascinating explainer lined up for you. We're going to completely dissect a landmark constitutional court case from South Africa. It's called William Mello and Constantina Botolo versus the state. Now, this is a case that fundamentally tests the absolute boundaries of our legal rights, and it takes a really hard look at what happens when law enforcement tries to take shortcuts, and those shortcuts collide head-on with constitutional guarantees. So I want you to ask yourself this right now. Can you actually be convicted of a crime literally just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Think about how terrifying that would be, right? Imagine you just catch a ride with an acquaintance. You get pulled over, and suddenly, bam, you're facing serious prison time for something someone else hid in the vehicle, all simply because you were sitting nearby. Honestly, it sounds like a bad movie plot. But for the appellants in our case study today, it was a very harsh, very real reality.
All right, Section 1, the dagger in the truck. So let's lay out the tangible, true crime facts of what actually went down with William Mello and Constantina Botolo. The facts of the case start off pretty simply, really. Mello and Botolo were passengers in a truck that was being driven by someone else. They got pulled over, and the police did a search of the vehicle. And during that search, several packages of daga, which, by the way, is cannabis, were found hidden away in various parts of the truck. Now, normally in a situation like this, the police would have to prove that the passengers actually knew about the drugs, right? That they intended to possess them. But here's the kicker. The Pretoria Magistrates Court found them guilty of possession simply because they were in the vehicle. Their mere proximity to the hidden drugs led straight to a criminal conviction. So how on earth did that happen? Well, that brings us to Section 2, guilty until proven innocent.
Okay, we need to zoom out a bit from the specific story of these two passengers and look at the actual legal mechanic that allowed a magistrate to convict them so easily. Let's dive into this legal concept known as the reverse onus. In the prosecution of Mello and Botolo, the magistrate relied on a very specific presumption created by Section 20 of the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act of 1992. Basically, Section 20 stated that if a drug was found in the immediate vicinity of an accused person, the law just automatically presumed they were in possession of it. It created this so-called reverse onus, which means instead of the state having to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you possess the drugs, the burden of proof suddenly shifted entirely to you. You had to prove, on a preponderance of probabilities, that you were actually innocent. And if you can convince the court, even if there was a completely reasonable doubt about your guilt, you were convicted anyway. It literally turns normal justice completely upside down. What's really fascinating here is thinking about the absolute gold standard of criminal justice. Usually, the prosecution holds this incredibly heavy burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's there for a reason, right? It protects everyday citizens from wrongful convictions. But under Section 20 of the Drugs Act, the scales of justice are completely tipped. By forcing an accused person to prove a negative, to somehow definitively prove they didn't know about drugs hidden in a truck they didn't even own, the law was basically making it dangerously easy to convict innocent bystanders. Which leads perfectly into Section 3. The constitutional clash. So, when South Africa transitioned to democracy, a powerful new set of rules was introduced, and they did not play nicely with these old legal shortcuts. Just listen to Section 25, subsection 3C of South Africa's interim constitution. It says, every accused person shall have the right to a fair trial, which shall include the right to be presumed innocent. Now, this is a fundamental human right. It protects the core values of justice in an open and democratic society based on freedom and equality. And you can immediately see the direct, undeniable conflict here, can't you? You absolutely cannot simultaneously guarantee someone the right to be presumed innocent while also actively enforcing a law like Section 20 that explicitly presumes they're guilty just because they were near a drug. Because of this massive contradiction, the appeal proceedings for Mello and Botolo were actually suspended specifically to refer this huge constitutional question to the highest court in the land.
Moving on to Section 4, past precedents of presumption.
When this issue finally reached the Constitutional Court, the judges weren't exactly navigating uncharted waters. They had definitely seen this kind of legislative shortcut before. And this brilliantly illustrates their approach. Because in previous landmark cases like Mabasa and Prince Lou, the court unanimously struck down a very similar reverse onus regarding illegal firearms. The judges had warned back then that such laws carry a very real risk of convicting totally innocent persons who just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Then, we also have the Bujuana and Nsele cases, where other presumption laws were similarly invalidated. The court consistently ruled that, look, if a legislative limitation is motivated by a strong societal need, like fighting crime, which is obviously important, it still must be finely tuned and appropriately balanced. It simply cannot have a disproportionate impact on fundamental human rights. So frankly, the writing was very much on the wall for Section 20 of the Drugs Act.
All right, here we go. Section 5, the court's final judgment. Justice Mokgoro delivered the unanimous decision for the Constitutional Court regarding Section 20. She drew heavily on all those past precedents we just talked about, and she made it incredibly clear. She argued that the right to be presumed innocent is so vital, and the danger of eroding it is so incredibly grave, that you would need an absolutely compelling reason to ever override it. And she stated quite bluntly, none is apparent here. The societal interest in easily convicting drug traffickers, as real as it is, simply does not outweigh the massive, terrifying risk of sending an innocent bystander to prison just for sitting in the wrong truck. Justice Mokgoro declared that Section 20 offends against the very essence of the right to a fair trial. It was found entirely unjustifiable and therefore completely unconstitutional.
And here is a genuinely fascinating detail that shows just how totally indefensible this law had become. The state didn't even try to defend it. No way. The Attorney General of the Transvaal actually submitted a letter essentially saying, hey, in light of the previous decisions, like the Mbatha case, we are not even contesting this. They straight up conceded that Section 20 was inconsistent with the Constitution. So, when the Constitutional Court convened to hear the matter in May of 1998, they decided oral argument wasn't even necessary. The state had already completely surrendered the point.
Let's look at the fallout in Section 6, Impact of the Ruling.
Okay, so it's one thing to declare a law unconstitutional in a high-minded courtroom in Johannesburg, but what does that macro-constitutional law actually mean for real people caught in the system? Well, the court had to decide who exactly would benefit from this ruling. They had to balance the interests of justice for individuals against the interests of quote-unquote good government, meaning they couldn't just throw out every single closed case from the past 20 years and cause total chaos in the criminal justice process. So they applied the ruling retrospectively, but with a very specific cutoff. The invalidation of Section 20 would apply to any criminal trial where the verdict was entered after the interim constitution came into force and where an appeal or review was still currently pending. This was huge. It essentially rescued people who were unfairly convicted under this unconstitutional shortcut and were still actively fighting their way through the appeal process.
Ultimately, the tangible outcomes of all this were massive. Section 20 of the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act was declared completely invalid and of no force in effect. The declaration applied retroactively to cases currently in the appeal pipeline. And as for William Mello and Constantino Botolo, who had been waiting in limbo this whole time, well, their specific case was referred back to the Transvaal High Court to be dealt with in accordance with this brand new judgment. Without that reverse onus presuming their guilt right out of the gate, the state would actually have to prove they knowingly possessed the daga. That is a much steeper hill to climb for the prosecution, but honestly, that is exactly how a fair justice system is supposed to work.
To wrap things up, I really want to leave you with this final provocative thought. How can a society effectively fight serious crimes like drug trafficking without sacrificing the fundamental human right to be presumed innocent? It's a really delicate balance, isn't it? Law enforcement absolutely needs effective tools, but as we saw clearly in Mello v. Estate, when those tools take the shortcut of just presuming guilt, they strike at the very core of a free society. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me to unpack this explainer today. I really hope these insights helps clarify exactly how the mechanics of constitutional law actively protect everyday citizens. Keep analyzing, keep questioning everything, and I'll see you in the next explainer.